Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this vintage episode of science fiction, where I take old stories, 100 years or so, and narrate. This particular story is called The Devil's Understudy, and it was written by Charles S. Wolfe in 1913. I hope that you enjoy. Most every town's got one, I guess. Crazy scientist, I mean. One of these absent-minded, high-browed old birds that comes wandering, trance-like down the street, with their hands behind their backs and their minds off someplace in the sweet bye-bye. People turn and grin when one of them passes and says to one another, "There goes the crazy scientist." I don't grin after them. I mean, I turns and gives them the birds, the most careful 00. I notes any peculiarities now, their gait, height, and so forth. And if I ain't got too much else to do, just then I tags along after them, casual-like, and see where they hang out. Then, if I want to begin, I know where to start and look, 'cause you never can tell about those babies. 9 out of 10 of them are just mild nuts, the kind that gets into a bathtub and forgets to turn the water off. But the 10th lad, oh boy. The sore bones that examined Gleason told me the insanity's merely a question of degree, which I take it is just a way of saying that some is bad and some is worse. Gleason now was in a class by himself, hands down. He wins the non-skid soaps dish. 20 years I've been roaming the streets in plain clothes, and I've only run into one Gleason. If I ever meet another, I'm through roaming. Remember the Gleason case, do you? I'll never forget the way it started off. I was in the office with the old man, making a report, when Bill Lawrence comes busting in without even knocking. His eyes were bulging right out of their sockets, and you could see something had upset him awful. The old man gets ready to freeze Bill for his sudden entrance, but Bill never gives him a chance. "For God's sake, Chief," he cries, "it's terrible, horrible." "Heavens, Lawrence," yells the chief, mad as a wet hen. "Are you growing hysterical? What's the trouble?" "Murder," gasps Bill wildly. "Well, what of?" roars the old man. "Haven't you ever seen murder before? What's the matter? Losing your nerve?" "Yes, but these murders," Lawrence protested feebly. "These murders," echoes the chief. "There was 2 of them, then?" "10 of them, Chief," Lawrence said half-sobs. "10 of them?" bellows the chief. "That ain't murder, you poop. That's civil war. What are you talking about?" "It's true, Chief," says Lawrence solemnly, getting some kind of grip on himself. 10 men killed right out in the open street, and nobody knows who's done it or how it was done. Big fellows they are, too. Bankers and the like." The chief was getting right down to business. "Bomb outrage, was it?" he growls at Lawrence. "No, sir," replies Bill. "No violence, sir." "No violence?" the old man bleats. "What's eating you, Bill Lawrence? How can you have murder without violence? A gink is shot, stabbed, strangled, poisoned, or beaten. If you don't think them violent, just ask the victim. How was this job pulled off?" I don't know," says Bill soberly. "I looked at the bodies over. No marks in them, not one. They're just dead, that's all. They topple right over in the street, right in the crowd. They don't even holler. When you pick 'em up, they're deader than Ramses." Growls the chief. "Something wrong somewhere." The telephone bell jingles just then, and the chief leans his ear against the receiver and grunts. He hears someone yapping on the other end of the line. And then the old man slams it back on the hook and glares at us. "6 more," he says coldly, and poor Bill Lawrence groans. I ventures to hoard it. "Poisoned needle, maybe, eh?" I says, and the chief looks thoughtful. "Maybe, yes," he says slowly, lighting a cigar. "Yeah, Martin, as likely as you said it. That would leave only a small pinprick, and wouldn't show up until the doctor gave the bodies a careful going over. Come on, you 2. I want to look into this thing myself." So the 3 of us whizzes down in the old man's Lizzie into the financial district, where all of the slaughter is going on. Everything's on its necks when we gets down there. The people in standing around in mobs, everybody's looking scared and ready to run. The boys in the corners is having the time of their young lives trying to keep cars from coming together, as scared chauffeurs makes desperate attempts to get worse scared big guys away from there. Things look just right for anything to happen. The chief runs the Lizzie into the curb alongside the nearest hitching post. Habit, he can't get out of it since he sold his horse and buggy. We all jumps out, and just as we hits the sidewalk, a burly old guy keels over right at our feet. The chief rips out an oath and blows his whistle, as the crowd surges in. I pulls my gat and uses it as a club, and Lawrence Coe does likewise. Between us, we keep the old man from being trampled to death, until 2 harness bulls comes and takes over. Then we kneels with the chief and looks at the unlucky old codger over. All 3 of us has had considerable experience in these matters, and it only takes us a minute for us to see that he's been gathered up to his fathers, sure enough. But the funny part of it is that we can't see no trace of what took him off, no bruises, wounds, or anything, and you simply can't croak a guy without doing something to him. A couple of more flat feet is on hand by this time, and the chief sends for the wagon. Want the doc to go over the stiff with a fine-tooth comb, he says to us briefly, all 3 of us keeping right on looking for some clue as to how the deadly work is being got away with. There is some commotion in the crowd, and I looks to see a guy elbowing his way through the mob as if he meant it. After a minute, I make him one of our gang, Frank Nelson. I nudges the chief, and he beckons Nelson to join us. Just the bird I want now, he says to me under his breath. Nelson was the only highbrow in our outfit. College man he was, one of them unlucky lads that was fitted for better things, but just can't seem to get the hooks on them. When Frank got out of college, he made about 12 starts and drew that just as many blanks. Finally, he's down to the point where he can take his choice between the force and going to work. Some influential friends takes pity on him, pulls a few strings, and he lands in our midst, a full-fledged plainclothes man. Wasn't long before the chief was right glad to have him hanging around. He wasn't nothing extra for going down in downtown saloon and picking out a particular dip he wanted, which is our everyday work. But whenever an odd case came up, he generally was there with both feet. He had a stock of odds and ends knowledge that would take you off your feet, and the old man used him as a kind of human encyclopedia. Well, Nelson joins our family group and looks over the body. Finally, he straightens up and gazes down on the corpse admiringly. Excellent, he beams out at us. I've seen so much killing of various sorts since I got into this business that I fancy myself as a connoisseur. Now this is one splendid example of the art. Here we have a perfect specimen. The chap that did this certainly knows his business, and I can heartily recommend him to any one of need of service as a thorough, all-round man. The chief frowns. Can the small talk, Frank, he growls. Got any idea how this fellow was bumped off? Nelson shook his head. Not a single slightest, he said, except the conviction that some entirely unknown weapon is being used. The old man jerked his thumb at me. Martin has an idea of poison needle stunt. Martin's wrong, replied Nelson decidedly. I'm just from the morgue, where the department doctors are working on some of the others. There isn't a pinprick or a scratch on any of them. But it's murder, all right. For in the clothes of particularly all of them were finding notes warning them that they are marked for death, and counseling prayer and repentance. Some kind of red judgment from the tone of the notes. Well, the old man fairly bit his words. Whatever he is, or whatever he's using, don't make any difference in what we gotta do. We gotta get this gink, and we gotta get him quick. At the present rate, he'll wipe out the town in a week. You don't know when he'll take it into his head to start on us, and if he does that, you'll wish you had used your brains a bit more. Scatter, dig into it. Here comes a wagon. Mix into the crowd and see what you can do. Nelson grabbed me with a big arm and drew me along with him. We got out of the jam, and Nelson pilots me into the back of a room of a nearby saloon. Over a couple of glasses of the nearest beer they had, he opens up. Now then, Martin, he says, I've been on the jump since the first guy got his, and I got an idea of how maybe this is being done, but I ain't got a ghost of an idea of who is doing it. The only way that I can see that we got a chance of finding out is to lay a trap for the fiend, and traps are always baited. Now, I know you got lots of nerve. Are you game to be a piece of cheese? Get me a little more, I says, cautious-like. The idea of being a chargon for whatever the guy's working ain't none too pleasant to contemplate. What's your idea? Do you know Simmons, the big broker? I nodded. Well, he's on the list. Got a note like the rest of them. I just left him before I joined you fellows. He's over in his office, scared to come out. Don't blame him much, that. You're about his build, and with a little alteration of your jib, some nice alfalfa like he wears, and so forth. I think we could ring you on this chap for the genuine article. We'll go over to his office, make you up, you come out to the street, me training you, and we'll see if I can get him." "Well, that'll be nice," I remarked. "And when the wagon's caught this blooming assassin away, you'll turn to the fat feet and say, 'Now, boys, one of you shin around to Martin's widow and break it to her gently.'" "Chances of that are about 50-50, says Nelson promptly. "If my guess is right, you won't run much real risk. If I'm wrong, there'll be a strange copper in hell sudden. Are you in?" "Well, it's all in a day's work, you know." I shrugs my shoulders. "Read on, Macbeth," I says grimly. "I'll be the goat." Nelson is already on his feet. "Outside," he orders. "Let's get going before you change your mind." Well, we beats it around to the headquarters and picks up a bit of makeup. While I'm getting my things together, Nelson blows out to do a little shopping and blows in again with a bundle. Off we go to Simmons' office. We find Simmons in a funk, scared stiff. We explain our idea, and he peels out of his duds. I study his fizz and imitate it with Nelson's help. Finally, Frank is satisfied. "Now strip, son," it is the next order, and I peels to the buff. Then Nelson unwraps his bundle, and I see it's thin rubber sheeting. "Best I could do, old boy," says Nelson, as he wraps it around my carcass, fastening it as best he can. "No time to get you a suit of this stuff made." "What's the idea?" I complains, for the stuff don't feel none too comfortable. "It's your life preserver," says Frank grimly. "Don't kick on it. It's the 50 chances that I said were with you." Well, it's his party, so I dresses in Simmons' duds over my rubber wrappings, and out into the street I go to invite some boob to kill me. Out of the corner of my eyes, I see Nelson loping around in the rear. After a half an hour of nothing happening, I kind of forgets the darn case, got interested in reading a big sign, and the first thing I know, there's a commotion behind me. I wheels, and there is Nelson wrestling a big old bird with bushy whiskers, who is hanging on for dear life to the black leather satchel. The crowd is already gathering in, so I double-quicks it into the melee. The next few minutes ain't quite so clear. That boy put up one a terrific scrap, and we both had our hands full. I tried a couple times to bore him, but I couldn't get a chance without shooting right through Nelson. But finally, I gets the butt end of my gat against his dome, and down he comes, panting. Frank slips on the wristlers, and up charges the harness bulls. "Wagon," orders Frank, and we keep half hitch on the old boy till it gets there. We drives around to the station, and the old man has a conniption fit when he sees what we got in the cart. The rest of the world knows. Our man turns out to be Professor Gleason, and the doctors find out he's warped from the Adam's apple up. And, brothers, when we frisked that lad, we had a machinery strewed all over his clothes, including his satchel, which contained the power plant. He wouldn't give us a tip to what it was all about, and somehow Nelson never could get the darn thing to work. Although he fussed over it for months, I ain't sure, and neither is anybody else, just exactly how he done it. Nelson says he's sure, but I got my doubts. Anyway, here's how Frank figures her. Maybe you know more about fancy juice work than I do. Most of it's over my head. Nelson says Gleason managed to electrocute his victims with juice from a few ordinary dry batteries. What? Yeah, I didn't think it could be done myself, but Nelson says it's a cinch. There was 2 jiggers in the satchel that Nelson called the ray generators. They had lenses fitted onto them. Frank says they brought the rays to focus. Seems that there's some light that you can't see at all, ultra or infra something or the other. Well, it is doped out that this old bird found one that would carry a current just as good as a chunk of copper wire does. Nelson says he thinks the professor must have got the altogether new one, although he says that there is at least one that is known to be a pretty good juice carrier. Now the real big idea was this. These blooming rays of light penetrated like X-rays do. Right under the hide they went, and along went the current too. Nelson says that once you get under the skin, which has great resistance, an awful weak current means a quick trip over the big divide. Forget now, but he did say, let's see. Ain't sure, but it runs in my mind that it was 75 milliamperes across the heart, or something like that. Don't know, but the doctors seemed to think that it would do it. All the old gink needed was a little outfit to make these rays and a few dry cells. He just bored you with 2 beams, and then, like any circuit, and turned on the juice. Seems Nelson guessed it was something like that, and wound me up in rubber, hoping that it would be an insulator for the thing. I know it was. And a little tip, brother, Gleason ain't the only bird that knows about the rays being conductors and all that. Get yourself some rubber underwear made. I got mine right now. End of story.